Hi, in this episode I reference the book Peak, written by Ericsson, a remarkable book and one of 7 books I believe has had the biggest impact on my life. Changing one's life can be tough going at the best of times, and Anders' books prove that it's not a fruitless attempt. All his work is backed up with research and data. I strongly recommend buying this book and reading it. I'm glad this podcast gave me an opportunity to revisit this material and share it with you. I hope you enjoy listening. Thanks.
There's a book called Peak, written by a chap called Anders Ericsson, and it's in my top 10 books that I've ever read. It's one of the most phenomenal books. He's been researching since the 70s how people become top performers. So the best of the best. How to become an expert, but also how to become an expert amongst experts. There's a lot to be said for mastery and to really hone your skills and really become good at something. And the examples that he used in his book were musicians, classically trained musicians, chess players, sportsmen, runners, athletes, gymnasts, those kind of things. And the reason that he used these particular groups was because you can measure performance. If you look at a classical pianist, and it's quite an interesting thing, because I was thinking about this. It was interesting for me. I love music. I'm sure everybody loves music, and we all have varied tastes. And if you look at a genre like pop music or many types of music, it's not necessary to be able to read music. It's helpful, but there are many artists I know who can't read music and who play instruments and are self-taught. So there's a whole section of the population there who don't have theoretical knowledge and theoretical background, but have really excelled in what it is that they do. So, I mean, a classic example of that would be like rappers. You can't go to school to learn how to be a rapper. You know, I don't know if there's no music theory that I'm aware of when you do something with rap. The way that I understand how rap works is certainly the guys that are at a higher level, the guys producers send them beat tracks, and the beat tracks that they like, then they do something with it, and then buy the beat track or pay royalties for the beat track, unless you're doing that whole process yourself, which in itself can be quite a thing. So there's no way to measure who is good and who is bad, other than by what people like and who really rises above and who doesn't. But when you look at something like classical music, and this is something that's interested me a lot. I have a friend who played for all the Philharmonic orchestras in South Africa. She played for the Johannesburg Philharmonic Orchestra, she played for the Cape Town Philharmonic Orchestra, and she played for the Pretoria Philharmonic when we still had Philharmonic orchestras and they were still sponsored. And she played 2 instruments. One of her instruments was the piano. And she wouldn't play the piano easily for somebody. She wanted to practice a piece, and then she would play a piece that she had perfected. So a lot of my understanding of how classical music works is someone will learn a piece, because classical music, the way it's written down, it's like a play. It's like Shakespeare. You memorize the play and then you reenact the play. With music, your timing, your speed, your notes, everything is charted and written down. So to move from just reading a piece of music and playing a piece of music to playing a piece of music perfectly the way that it's written down on the score, to then perhaps your interpretation of that music, I don't know where that fits in classical music. Is the feeling and the emotion that is generated by the music in the written music, or is it the artist's skill where he has his technique so perfected that he's able to play it perfectly and then create the emotion and the feeling that is around a piece of music? This is just stuff that I think about. But when I do listen to professional people who read music, who are at the top levels, they say that it's very important to learn and understand and master your technique. And it's something that can be measured. They have music exams, there's grading, you go from grade 1 to grade 8, you can become a music teacher. It also depends on, before you go to university, what grade you are at and how many hours you've been practicing. Depends on whether you move into the area of first violin or second violin or third violin or fourth violin or virtuoso. Or if you are a music teacher who never makes it to the levels of performance. So there's a lot of measurements that can be done to evaluate and establish performance, which is why he's using these specific fields. Chess is the same, and it's quite interesting. If you learn how to play chess and you play a lot of chess, you can get to a point where you're comfortable and you're competent in your ability. The danger exists that you know enough to play and perhaps to win people that you play with, that's where you stop progressing and you stop working on your skill and you stop working on your ability, because you know enough. And over years, over 20 years, everything that Anders Ericsson talks about in his book is referenced. And I'm going to reference him in all of this stuff. So if you want to find out if what I'm talking about is true, go and read the book and go and have a look at the book, because all the information comes out of there. And what he's saying is, with medical doctors, that over a 20-year period, if they don't work on improving their abilities atrophy and deteriorate. So I used to be on the chess team at school. If I have to play chess now, I'm going to get severely beaten. So it's important, obviously, to continue to work on your skills and continue to improve your skills, especially if you're a doctor, especially if you're my doctor. And you're going to be operating on me. I want to know that the person that I'm dealing with, is up to date. So trying to identify people that are really good. Another example would be in this competition on TV. I don't know if anybody's ever seen The Voice. It's singing competition. And the way that they do it is they have the judges not looking at the competitors. So it's a blind challenge. So it's based purely on the person's voice, on the performance, and what it is that what they're hearing. Because it's very difficult in judging somebody's voice without measures, purely just on listening, because the way that people's performances are evaluated is definitely on what does this person look like. You know, what is the energy? What is the vibe that they do? They have any appeal? Do they look right for what it is that we are hoping to achieve here in the competition? So the judges' biases can come into play when choosing a person. You might not be choosing the person with the best voice if it's a singing competition and it's about the person's voice, because those are things that you can change to a degree. You can change a person's look, you can work with a person's look and their energy, and coach them and teach them if they have a good enough voice, which is all part of, I think, part of that competition. There are a couple of specific things, if we speak in a more general way and are not looking at specifically the music business, biases that people have when they start to judge things that are difficult to quantify and difficult to measure, and it's education. So how many degrees does this person have? You know, are they the right person for the job because they have all these degrees? And you'll see it depends, and it's not always necessarily true that the most educated person is the right person for getting the job done or what needs to be accomplished. How much experience a person has. You know, when you're dealing with salesmen, they might be selling you rubbish. They might be selling you something that they're not able to provide, but because they have a lot of experience in sales, that they can put something across. You know, there's bias there. Seniority, friendliness. Just because you like the person, they make a very good first impression. You know, can change your opinion. It's not a measurable. It takes the measurement out of the equation. When they talk about financial experts who choose stocks on the stock exchange, they say that stock analysts have about as much of a chance as choosing the right stocks as people who are just beginning and random chance. And you have whole organizations dedicated to, and people selling software and all kinds of things to help you choose the right stocks and, you know, trade on the stock exchange. It would seem it doesn't matter how much experience you have, unless maybe you're Warren Buffett, who seems to be able to make his way through these things. But then he's got all his money invested in Coca-Cola, which is a sure thing, you know. And evidence to back this claim up is there. There was a gentleman, I have the book, he wrote a book called House of Cards, not the TV series, it's a book. And in his book, he quotes research that shows that psychiatrists, now a psychiatrist, to my understanding, studies to be a doctor, a GP, and then studies a further, if I'm not mistaken, 7 years to become a psychiatrist. So you're looking at 12 to 14 years of being at university studying to be a psychiatrist. And psychologists usually, I think it's about 5 years, 5, 6, 7 years to become a psychologist, are no better than ordinary lay people. Listen to this, with a little bit of training at therapy. At speaking to somebody and helping them with their problems. So it doesn't matter how much education you have. You can take any person and show them a few basic skills, and they will be just as good as somebody who has a whole host of degrees. Now, psychiatrists deal with a lot of sick people in mental hospitals that need professional help. Proper schizophrenia, proper bipolar, proper depression, all of those kind of things. So that's not therapy. You know, I'm talking about talking therapy, about speaking to people and helping them through their problems. A lay person is as good as one of those people. I thought that was quite interesting. Then, of course, the crowning glory of this whole thing, and again, the reason why I'm talking about this stuff is why he's using people in these specific fields to measure what is required to become an expert or a virtuoso in the music and athletics, and chess and those kind of things, because it's measurable. Sommeliers, wine tasters, is the biggest fraud and the biggest hoax that there is available on the planet. In 2005 and 2008, the Journal of Wine Economics did a test that was sponsored by a guy called Robert Hodgson, or started by a guy called Robert Hodgson, who was a winemaker in California. And they have these state fairs where they have many thousands of bottles of wine from farms are submitted for wine tasting, for competition. And then what they would do is they would break it down into groups of 30 for the sommelier to test. And in that group of 30, they would put 3 wines that were identical, exactly the same. And they did this at 4 different state fairs over a period of 3 years. In the same batch, tasting the same batch, 3 of exactly the same ones. Sometimes they scored like premium, like gold, and sometimes they scored like pick and pay special in a cardboard box. The exact same one, So it's not like that is something that you can use, and there are a lot of fields like that. One of my friends who was a wine lover knew this and said to me, the only reason that they have all of these wines and all of this wine tasting and all of this crap is to drink wine and to get pissed. It's an excuse to drink wine. So then when we're looking at any field, we need to be a little bit cautious on how we evaluate who is an expert and how that person got there and who the expert performers are. Probably the best way to do that is to get really close. So if obviously we're in a treatment center here, so a lot of this that I'm talking about is going to be related in terms of metaphor to recovery and to what we do in the treatment center. Only by going to NA meetings and AA meetings will you find the meetings that are the good meetings. And if you're looking for a sponsor, only by getting close to people and connecting to people and speaking to people will you find out who are the people that are going to be able to help you and who are the people who are not going to be able to help you. Because there are a lot of people, and I've experienced this as well, there are a lot of people that I've asked to sponsor me, which is why I still have the same sponsor that I have now, who speaks so intelligently and so clearly at a meeting. And it's like the message is always, at a meeting, just, if you hear somebody who speaks your language, go and speak to that person. Really, when you get close and in that environment and really start looking to see what is around you, that you can begin to see the actual truth of what is taking place. I will say, and it's something that I see quite rarely, is when people talk the language of surrender and the language of letting go, which is really the message of what AA and NA is about. They're few and far between. Those are the guys that I have a tendency to gravitate towards. But there are also of those guys who can talk that talk, but who don't have that solid commitment. I know I was at a meeting with a guy, and he'd start off his talk with this, like, let go and trust the process, and then would give everybody a lecture on their business, which kind of really annoyed me, because I would be sharing my things there, and then it would come to his turn and give me a lecture about, what I should be doing, and that really pissed me off. So when you get close and when you get involved, that you will be able to see a little bit more clearly, because there are so many biases that we have in fields that are not subjective. So if we move a little bit towards the fields that I'm talking about, the idea here is, and it's quite funny. I had a music teacher. I wanted to learn to play flamenco guitar. I love Spanish guitar more than anything else. And I found a teacher. I had taught myself some of the basics, harmonic minor scales, some of the chord progressions that work together. And I went and got a teacher, and he started teaching me. But the guy really irritated me because I didn't like the way that he looked. And it was such a drag for me to go. He had bad teeth. Such a drag to go there, and he taught me things, and I stayed in it because he did have some idea. He knew more than I did and was able to help me to the next level. Unfortunately, I hurt my fingers, so I couldn't continue with the Spanish, which is such a tragedy for me. So I started progressing in the Spanish, but also then when I would listen to him play, he would also talk this fabulous talk, but he couldn't really play authentic flamenco. And the interesting thing is I really looked here in Joburg. There aren't flamenco guitar teachers in Joburg, which I find quite surprising. I was a little bit let down. But the thing about that is he was able, in spite of all of that, to teach me more than I knew and to point me in the direction that I needed to go. And I would have stuck it out if it wasn't for the problems with the fingers. In 2011, at the Morgan Stanley Hospital in the US, which is quite surprising to me that this is only something that developed in 2011. We're talking about a hop, skip, and a jump. 2008 now, so that's seven years ago. They compiled a data bank of X-rays of children's ankles. They had 234 case studies, X-rays, files, and what they did was that they took trainee doctors in to teach them, trainee radiologists, not trainee doctors, trainee radiologists, to examine these X-rays and see if they could help them progress in the field. And what they discovered was that with the first 20 cases that they looked at, they bumbled their way through. Now, what they did is they would have an expert in the field sitting with them, giving them feedback on what it was that they were seeing. So there was somebody sitting there teaching them, so they would have a go, and then this person would point out the mistakes and point out the differences and where the person could make changes. And in the first 20, the guys struggled a little bit, but after that they started improving, and they started getting better throughout the study. So we're talking 234 cases as part of training. The first 20, the person started improving and continued to improve in their ability to diagnose something as simple as ankle injuries. Now, if you think, I'm sure all of us have been to a radiologist, and we trust that person And that person writes a report and gives us a diagnosis. If they're looking at children's ankles in 2011 and doing these kind of studies, what is the information that we're getting? How much experience does that person have? And the important part of what I'm talking about is having a feedback loop. Because that trainee radiologist was sitting there with somebody who had a lot more experience than him, pointing out where he was going wrong and what he was doing and helping him to identify problems. So if you're looking, I mean, everybody here has seen an X-ray. You look at an X-ray and it's grey blobs everywhere. I mean, you can't, it's quite a skill that's required to identify what is going on there. The importance of that feedback loop when you're dealing with something that you don't understand. There was a they were doing laparoscopic operations, and they were evaluating how laparoscopic surgery was going with a group of doctors in California. Laparoscopic is where they make the little holes, 2 little holes, and then they send the probes in. And what they found was they were looking specifically at gallbladder operations, because what they found was that again and again and again and again, there was one specific part of that operation where the person doing the operation would make a mistake, where a more experienced person wasn't making the mistake. And what it was is there's the gallbladder, and apparently there's a bile duct very close to the gallbladder. And what these doctors would do is they would cut the bile duct. And what they discovered is that even although the person knew that he was doing the wrong thing in the operation, he would still do it. Cognitive dissonance, that like committed to a plan of action and a course of action and going to see the operation through. And what they discovered is, and it's so simple, it sounds so simple, is that if the person just pushed the tissue aside a little bit, that they would be able to see the difference between this bile duct and the gallbladder, which it's a bit confusing to me, because with my absolute minimal medical knowledge, the gallbladder sounds like a bile duct, if I'm not mistaken. So they're very similar, they look very similar. And part of the idea of doing this research was to minimize these accidents in the operations and to teach these doctors how to be more successful. And then again, it comes back to that feedback loop of there you have people that are professionals at the highest level using the latest technology to operate on people, cutting into the wrong things and doing the wrong things. And in essence, so there's again a measurable field is having a feedback loop available as part of training to help people improve their performance. I'm going to have to talk faster. The idea behind this is a flight simulator. So people flying plane loads of people all over the place first have to become competent in a flight simulator before they can actually start flying people around. In 2004, at the Ikkyo Music School in Tokyo, a Japanese psychologist, Ayako Sakakibara, published in the scientific journal The Psychology of Music, that he was able to take a group of 24 children between the ages of 2 years old and 6 years old, and you guys have heard me speak about this before, and teach them perfect pitch. Perfect pitch naturally occurs in 1 in 10,000. Perfect pitch is what makes a virtuoso. Virtuosos are often credited with having perfect pitch. 1 in 10,000. He took these 24 children, and what he did was 5 times a day for just a few minutes every day, they would give them training to identify piano chords. So a C chord, a D chord, an E chord, consisting of 3 notes on the piano, to teach them to identify just through sound what key was being playing. And there were 14 chords that they had to learn. So if I just think for myself, it's all the majors maybe and all the minors. And it took just under a year, up to 18 months, to teach all 24 children perfect pitch. All 24 learned them. And what they're saying is, and perfect pitch disappears. You can only learn it when you're young. It can only happen up until the age of 6. After the age of 6, you lose the ability. Is that these skills can be learned. And any skill can be learned. Depending on where in life you are able to make certain changes. And my thinking around that is I remember from some time ago with basketball, it always seems to be the tall guys and the big guys are always the basketball players. But I remember, and I cannot for the life of me remember what this guy's name was, but he was a short guy. And he just seemed to be able to go underneath all of these big guys and slip through their guard. And he was phenomenal. I remember watching this. I can't remember what his name is. I mean, it was amazing to watch. He was so fast, and he was so quick, and he was so agile, and he was a top performer in a field where he shouldn't have been a top performer because of his height limitation. But obviously, he had the training, genetically. There's certain things that can be modified and adjusted at certain times in our lives. Obviously, when you get to my age, there's no ways I'm going to be a basketball player. I'm too old and too heavy for that to happen. The idea here being is that the limitations that we place on ability and skill and performance are the limits that we place on ability, skill, and performance. Oftentimes these things are psychological. There are 2 ways that you can climb a mountain. I've hiked extensively. I know how to read maps. I know how to work a compass. I know how to do all of that stuff. And there are 2 ways that you can climb a mountain. Because oftentimes there's a multitude. You go to the Drakensberg, there's a multitude of paths. You know, you can just pick a path and hope for the best and hope that you're going to get to the top. Or you're going to use your skill and your ability and map reading skills, or you're going to get a guide to take you to the top. You know. Now, in the 1970s, what Anders Ericsson did was he wanted to test the potential of short-term memory and of taking someone and training them to improve their short-term memory to see what was the he was working on this expertise, and just to see if it could be done with a little bit of training. Now, the guy that he got, what he would do was the 2 of them. The guy was a marathon runner, and what he would do is he would repeat a number to the guy at 1 second intervals, random numbers. So 6, 9, 8, 4, 3, and then when he was finished, he would get the guy to repeat the numbers to him. And on the first day of the experiment, the guy could comfortably do 7 numbers in his short-term memory. That's enough to remember a telephone number, if somebody says to you, just remember this telephone number, and you just, in your short-term memory, remember it so you can run and go write it down. So short-term memory is remembering something for a very short period of time, a small amount of information that you can just do something with quickly. There was decades of evidence to prove that was the limits. 7, 8, 9 numbers were the limits of what could be held in the short-term memory. He quoted a study from 1929, which is why he started this particular experiment. He found this paper stashed away in research somewhere, that over a 4-month period, they had gotten one guy to remember from 9 numbers up to 13 numbers in 4 months, and another guy from 11 to 15 over a period of 4 months. And he started with this guy. Within 4 one-hour sessions, he'd been able to get him to remember 8 to 9 numbers consistently, but not 10. The guy that he was doing the experiment with got to the point, it was on day 4 about, where he was kind of, at his wit's end, like, I don't think that I will be able to remember more than this. I'm at my limit. And like I said to you, there's decades of evidence, and the Anders Ericsson, who was doing this experiment, was aware of all of this evidence, and he was thinking, well, this was the end of the experiment, that this guy can only go so far. The way that he would do the experiment is, he would say, read 6 numbers to the guy, and then he would repeat the 6 numbers to him. Then he would repeat 7, and he would repeat the 7 back. Then he would repeat 8, and if he got it wrong, he would go back 2, and he would start at 6 again and go forward. So what was happening is, he was keeping him at a level where he was constantly just pushing him with one number, not so hard that he was unable to fulfill the task, and then going back again and seeing if he could. And again, that constant feedback loop, that immediate constant feedback loop. This is where it gets interesting. Within 5 days, he was memorizing up to 11 numbers correctly. By their 16th session, 16 one-hour sessions, he was remembering 20 numbers. Now remember, nobody had ever done this before. Within 100 sessions, he was remembering 40 numbers. I mean, you can think, somebody just reading one number a second in random order to you, stopping, and then you repeating it back to him. Within 200 sessions, he was remembering 82 digits. When he hit the 40-digit mark, nobody had ever been able to memorize and recall immediately that many numbers. Not even these memory guys who impress everybody with everything that they remember. And what he's saying is that the 20 sessions took about 2 years. And all that Anders was doing was just repeating to him in a constant feedback loop. What Steve Fallon had done is he had taught himself. It's an important thing to remember. He had taught himself how to do this over a period of time. He had gone away from every session and would think about, how can I do better? How can I remember that next number? There's all kinds of mnemonic techniques and all kinds of things, and he would have to adapt the way that he put all of this stuff together. It was not a case of the guy just reading the numbers to him and him sitting there and then just reading it back to him automatically. He would create patterns. You can think 82 numbers. To remember them in perfect order, he created a system. He taught himself how to do it slowly over a period of time with feedback. more than anybody else had ever done in the world, and he was just some kind of university grad who was learning how to become a teacher at a university who happened to come into contact with this guy. In 1908, a chap by the name of John Hayes won the Olympic marathon and set a new world record with 2 hours and 55 minutes. If I'm not mistaken, a marathon is 42 kilometers. 1908, 2 hours, 55 minutes. The current record today is 2 hours and 2 minutes. So then the question arises, are we being born today fitter than we were back then? Or are we born with exactly the same physiques, but we've learned more since then that we know now? That's a 1 hour off the world record. In fact, if you don't run that old 1908 world record time, you cannot enter the Boston Marathon. In, again, 1908, the double somersault was nearly banned from Olympic competition because they thought that it was too dangerous. Right now, high school divers are doing 4.5 somersaults in high school. Olympic swimmers are doing 2.5 backward somersaults with 2.5 twists. You know, which in 1908, where these guys were just doing a double, where they thought a double somersault was too much. I can't imagine what the Olympic diving must have been like. To just jump off the board and plop in the water. Not memorizing numbers the way that I'm talking with short-term number memorization, but remembering digits, remembering numbers. In 1973, a chap by the name of David Spencer was able to memorize 511 digits of pi. You know the equation of pi, 0.314, whatever. 511 in 1973. In 1978, David Skanker, 10,000 numbers, able to remember 10,000 numbers. In 2015, Rajveer Meena, 70,000 numbers of pi. Took him 24 hours to repeat the numbers so that the adjudicator could write it down. 2015. What Anders Ericsson is saying, which is I'm sure what you guys must be thinking, is lots and lots and lots of practice. I spoke about something as simple as learning how to play chess, but if we take it even simpler, as something like playing tennis, where you learn the basics at school and you go to the wall and you practice getting the ball over the net and you practice your serve. Now I know from my own experience in learning how to play squash, I learned how to play squash at school and I love to play squash. But I got to a level of competence that I couldn't break through. And I used to play with my friend and he always used to beat me. There was nothing I could do. He used to get my serve every single time. I would get like 1 or 2 points and he would just get all the rest. I had gotten to a level of competence and I had stopped there. I was unable to teach myself how to go further. And I got a coach. Now I wish this was a Cinderella story, but it's again about getting help to move to the next level. Because what is required in these kind of situations is you get somebody to help you and somebody to coach you so that you can become better at what it is that you do. Happened with me with the music, started with the coaching, but I was playing so much squash and I twisted my ankle. So that was kind of the end of the squash, and I haven't played squash since then. What I'm saying makes sense. The idea is that by yourself, you are not going to get better. And you are not going to improve at whatever it is that you are doing unless you start teaching yourself and you have somebody giving you feedback about what it is that you are doing wrong. Which is why a sponsor is so important. You go out into recovery there, you have relationships, you have work, you have life, you have friends, and you come out of addiction and you have absolutely no clue how to deal with any of these things. And now all of a sudden, because you're in recovery, you're going to know how the stuff works. The purpose of having a sponsor is to have an immediate feedback loop, because you're going to go make mistakes. But you're going to have to be the one who is going to have to phone that person and speak to them about what it is that you're doing and where you went wrong, and they're going to help you get back on track so that you can succeed and so that you can stay sober. That you can teach yourself what it is that you need to know to do this without going off the deep end. Golf is an interesting one, because golf requires a lot of small adjustments, a lot of small things that you can do to improve your golf swing over a period of time. If you want to start at the rough and get onto the green, twist your hand, do this, do that. And golfers always going to the pro for tune-ups and to try and improve their game. And that's really there's a Japanese technique called Kaizen, which is lots of little small incrementals of improvement over a period of time will get you to where you want to be. Everybody wants to be a virtuoso, but the amount of dedication and the amount of work that is required, the amount of commitment that is required. I was reading something before I came in here. It really, really, really helps if you are doing something that you enjoy and something that you love, but it's not always possible. We had a discussion in the office about waiters, waiting tables, having the most unfulfilling jobs, unless you are trying to be the very best waiter that you can be. Because it's about what you do now that is going to impact on what you are going to do in the future. Where you are now and what you are doing now and the position that you are stuck in at the moment. Leadership. Leadership is about how you conduct yourself with the things that if you work for a boss that you hate, or you're working in an environment that you hate, you do the very, very best that you can. You give 10 rands worth of work for 5 rands worth of pay. That's how it works. Or you bitch and you moan and you whine and you complain and you feel sorry for yourself. And I'm stuck and I'm trapped here and there's nothing that I can do. You know, we all have to work. We all get stuck in situations that we don't like. Small incremental changes over a period of time with somebody to help you, because you will not be able to do it by yourself.